Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation that I'm going to have today with my friend Joe Levy. First of all, I'll give you a little bit of background about why we're here and what we're going to be talking about. Basically, this conversation originated from an article that I recently read on Mother Jones about some patients who had died in some treatment facilities. It got me to thinking about the implications of this. Obviously, most directly, the trauma that represents for families and for the staff at those facilities and for the fellow patients. But also from a business perspective, I'm a business person at the end of the day. And it got me thinking about risk and liability and what type of business implications treatment centers would see from incidents like this on their sites. When I started thinking about that, I immediately thought about my friend Joe, who is an expert in these type of matters. And I thought, what better thing could I do to help treatment center owners and operators out there sort of be better prepared for this type of incident on their campus? Because, you know, it could really happen to anybody at any time. You know, our clients and folks in this industry are dealing with very sick people every day, and there's always a risk of an adverse outcome. But I thought about, you know, what better sort of value could I provide for folks than to provide a platform for Joe to share some of his expertise and help people be better prepared for situations like this. So Joe, first of all, thank you so much for talking to us today. I'd love for you to tell our audience a little bit about yourself and risk strategies and, you know, your expertise.
Sure. Risk Strategies is a national privately held insurance brokerage and consulting firm. I am part of our national healthcare practice. I have over 60 teammates around the country who are focused exclusively on the healthcare industry. As we say, it's what we do all day, every day. From a personal standpoint, I've been an insurance broker my whole career and always focused on healthcare.
Awesome. So nobody better than you to help us understand more fully, you know, the risk management and liability issues associated with, you know, operating a healthcare facility, and in particular, you know, behavioral health or an addiction treatment program. So, you know, the first question that I sort of wanted to throw out to you is, you know, could you give us a bit of sort of an education on the different types of risk and liability that there are associated with, you know, an incident like this, where somebody, you know, has a very bad outcome, whether they die or they get very sick in a facility?
Right. Well, of course, the first liability is professional liability coverage for the professional services provided by the specific facility. You know, if you think about it in terms of, you know, what are the worst outcomes that could happen? Obviously, death being first and foremost, and then significant injury to a patient.
So in that case, you know, when you have, you know, an outcome like that, you know, what are some of the consequences that could come from that? I mean, you mentioned professional liability. So what, you know, what in more detail, what does that mean? What if you're on the hook for that, what does that mean for you?
Well, it certainly means you're probably going to get sued, or I shouldn't say probably, you know, the potential for, you know, a lawsuit when you have a negative outcome, you know, which a death or a significant injury obviously would be considered a negative outcome. So there's a financial you know, component to that, depending on the type of insurance, professional liability insurance that the particular provider has. They may have what we call guaranteed cost coverage, where the insurance company you pay a premium and the insurance company bears the entire financial responsibility for defense costs or any claims payments as a result of that negative incident. Or in the case, some clients have what we call a deductible or self-insured retention, where they would, if you will, have some skin in the game, where there would actually be some financial payment that they would make up to a certain level, and then the insurance company comes in and takes over the claim at that point, if you will, from a financial standpoint.
Got it. So when we're talking about financial liability, what is the right way for a facility, you know, owner or operator to think about, you know, the important factors that might determine, you know, whether they would bear that type of liability? So obviously anybody can sue anyone else at any time for any reason, but let's assume for a minute that it's not a frivolous lawsuit, that there has been a real, you know, serious, issue with a patient in a facility and their family is bringing a case, what are the factors that are going to swing the pendulum one way or the other as to whether the facility is responsible for that situation, or whether that was an unavoidable accident, or it sort of happened outside the liability of the facility?
Sure. From a defensive standpoint, if you will, the first thing you want to look at is, did we follow our standard of care? Where are our standard operating procedures and policies? Did we follow those? Were there any breaches, at any point in the, if you will, the continuum of care, the care provided for that particular patient? So that's the first thing from a, if you will, a defensibility standpoint is assessing the risk, assessing the claim is, did we follow our procedures and protocols, and did we follow good clinical procedures? Beyond that, obviously, depending on the nature and the circumstances, there's always a huge emotional component, right? Especially if you're talking, obviously, we're all living through the opioid crisis currently, which is affecting so many of our young adults and youth there, and even more emotion, if you will, is certainly involved when you have a young adult or a teenager or something involved, and that always has to be taken into account when you're assessing, trying to assess the liability, even though you may have followed all of the appropriate clinical care and policies and procedures, but you have to take those other factors into account and determine, is it something that you want to come to a reasonable settlement and put it behind you? Is it something you want to go down the road of possibly going to trial and a jury trial? The other piece to keep in mind is the public relations piece, right? So especially if there was a very harmful outcome or a death, is what's the potential public relations perspective? I hate to say that because it sounds so cold when you're talking about, but that's the world. This is the world that I live in and have chosen to live in. Is you certainly have to take that into consideration. If it's something that's better, to try to get it behind you and move on, that also needs to be taken in consideration.
Well, that's very true. I mean, this article that I read is sort of a case in point in that subject. Sort of as I said, we're dealing with very sick folks in this industry that can be self-harming, and there are all kinds of ways that they can do damage to themselves, or that harm can come to them, while they're in the care of addiction treatment facilities and behavioral health providers. But most of those cases you don't hear about. And it happened to be that this one article, sort of picked up on a series of cases with one provider. But the fact of the matter is, and I'm sure the result of that was very bad for PR for that provider. But, the fact of the matter is that, it can happen to any of us. And so it's, I think that PR point is an important one.
Absolutely. I mean, your clients and our clients are dealing in a very high risk environment, right? Where the stakes are very high. I mean, literally, lives are at stake and can be at stake. And when something happens, there's a lot of things to think through, a lot of facts to consider. And sometimes you can do everything right but still find yourself in a very difficult liability predicament.
Right. So let's assume for a minute that you're in a case where that's not true, though. So let's say that, you are in a case where, you've had an adverse outcome at the facility, and you do some investigation, and it turns out that maybe your policies and procedures weren't adhered to appropriately, or maybe your training wasn't really adequate, or maybe your staffing ratio was sort of, subpar. And you really are exposed to some legitimate issues, both, obviously you need to sort of take a hard look at yourself in the mirror and improve your own operations and care for your patients. But there's also a business issue there. And, you sort of talked a bit before about different types of insurance policies that can cover situations like this, and different strategies that you can take. I guess before I even get back into that, my first question is there anything that goes beyond that? Is there anything that goes beyond a financial risk? Is there criminal risk? Is there risk of prosecution in a case like that?
Sure. I mean, it's very hard to criminally prosecute a company or an organization, but certainly individuals, and we've seen this, through the entire spectrum, of the healthcare world, if you will, where you have bad apples and bad actors, and if they've done something malicious, whether it's some type of abuse, which is one, is probably the one we're most familiar with, whether it's physical abuse or sexual abuse. Obviously, a professional, a nurse, a physician takes an oath, and if they violated that oath, they've certainly put themselves into a position where they could be held criminally responsible for a serious injury or death, no question.
So, stepping back from that into the sort of more likely realm, or the sort of corporate realm, so to speak, and thinking about the liability, what types of steps can people take, or can companies take, both sort of before and after an incident has occurred, to help them sort of manage their liability, either around that particular incident or around future incidents?
Right. I mean, so we'll talk, kind of pre-incident, and then we'll talk post-incident, if that's okay. So pre-incident, again, we're, as an insurance broker and consultant, we're not clinicians, but we do work with insurance companies who specialize in the addiction treatment and behavioral health space, and many of those companies have professionals on staff who have a clinical background, whether that's a nursing background or some operational background, who can provide those clinical risk management resources that a client may want and need. So that's something that we not only encourage our clients to engage in, but also recommend that they engage in, even if it's not a requirement of the insurance company, to utilize their risk management services or subject their facility or facilities to some sort of risk assessment. So that's sort of the first thing on our end. It's something that we believe strongly in and encourage in. So again, it's having most providers, and in every healthcare setting, there's the very good ones, and then there's the okay ones and the not so good ones. Hopefully, I think all of our clients are the very good ones, and yours as well. But to have a professional, another set of eyes, look over the policies and procedures and how they're doing things from a clinical standpoint. And the benefit they also have is, whether you're a single site facility or a multi-site organization, and facilities is, somebody that has a broader spectrum of, looking at other facilities, whether it's in other states or just has a much larger sandbox, if you will, that they participate in, can provide some insight and some feedback and some quality tips that maybe, that you're not doing, or can share some best practices that they've seen implemented at their other clients' facilities that have worked very well. So that's sort of the, pre-incident. The post-incident, getting back to your question, is, if a client has a claim or a potential claim where upon their investigation, it's been determined that they didn't adhere to their clinical protocols or their policies and procedures, the thing you want to do is to try to get out in front of that. And, certainly if it was a significant, breakdown in procedures, that's obviously not a claim you probably want to take to the trial and go to court. Is again, how can we try to settle this claim for a reasonable amount that provides some level of compensation and closure to the individual or the individual's family who was harmed, and allows us to move forward. And then from a kind of an insurance or risk management standpoint, post situation is, again, going back and where did the breakdown, and why did the breakdown and where did it occur? Maybe that's maybe that's a lack of staff training or regular training. Again, looking for the assistance of our insurance company, which can make people a little bit anxious and nervous if they have had a, if you will, a breakdown in their protocols, is, bringing in the insurance company who probably paid all or a meaningful amount of that, that claim settlement, if you will, to come in and help them fix it. But if our view, my view of the world is, from an insurance standpoint, is to create, partnerships. And we think of ourselves as consultants. And if clients have that, if facility operators have that same mindset, is, it's not an adversarial, though it can be from time to time, but if they're a business partner of ours, okay, we had a problem, we made a mistake, there was a breakdown somewhere, how do we fix it and make ourselves better? And I think if the executive team or the ownership team of the facility, if they have that mindset and kind of bring that thought, and you've really set the relationship up as a partnership and not a transaction, that, chances are that you can, work together to make yourself better going forward, to hopefully prevent that incident or a similar incident from occurring again in the future.
Right. I think that's a really important sort of dynamic to cultivate and to sustain in all of your business relationships. Frankly, that's a big part of what I and we at Prosperity put at the center of our business. And I know you do also, Joe, is partnership rather than, sort of the traditional, transactional relationship. We're always looking to develop and deepen partnerships with clients and also non-clients. But I think it's really important, the idea that, when you are putting somebody together with an insurance provider, that's a part of that relationship as well. They're, in a very real way, the insurance company has got your back. And, for a provider, a healthcare provider to go into that relationship with that mindset and really engage the insurance company, I think is a really valuable piece of advice.
Yeah, I mean, insurance in its most simplest form is a promise to pay, right? So we want to make sure that we're matching, our clients with insurance companies who understand their business, are dedicated to their business, and that changes from time to time. Some insurance companies get out of certain class of business for whatever reason, but to try to make a good match. If you make a good match on the front end, like it's like a marriage, right? Mm-hmm. Hopefully, if you do your due diligence and date long enough and get to know each other, right? It'll be a lasting relationship, and we think those those clients who have those lasting relationships and long-term partnerships with their insurance provider, and hopefully also with their broker, that they are more fruitful for all parties, right? Insurance companies are for-profit, generally for-profit operations, but that makes for a better, more productive relationship over the long run.
So something you just said reminded me of a question that I've been wanting to ask you, which is, how different, if at all, is insurance for behavioral health or for addiction treatment relative to healthcare broadly? Because you just sort of said that, some insurance companies sort of specialize in this stuff. Does that go down to the level of specific subverticals within healthcare? And if so, how is it different to insure an addiction treatment center versus a hospital or an oncology group or some other type of healthcare practice?
Yeah, certainly. If you look at, if you put all of healthcare in one big bucket and then start to break it down into its components, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a senior living facility or behavioral health, there's certainly meaningful differences, from one organization to the other. I think from the behavioral health space, it's the potential for, you don't see a frequency of claims, but if you do see a frequency of claims within a provider or an organization, you've really got something to be concerned with. But right. It's more the severity, the potential severity that we spoke about. Obviously, whether it's mental health issues or addiction treatment, I think one of the first things, if not the first thing people think about, is, suicide. Obviously, that's about as negative, as difficult an outcome as you can have. So sort of the the high severity, if you will. That's more of an insurance term, not a frequency of claims, but it's the potential severity for a very negative outcome, if you will. So sort of looking at that, and there are some insurance companies that will write across, are interested in having clients across that entire healthcare spectrum, if you will. And there's some that are very specific. Maybe they just want to do physicians. Maybe they want to do behavioral health and senior living, but not hospitals. But maybe they want to do hospitals and behavioral health. As you know, the behavioral health space is changing so rapidly, and it's gained so much more understanding over the last couple of years. Even for me personally, if you think about over the last 5 years with the Affordable Care Act, and a lot more understanding and education around mental health and addiction treatment, I think the insurance companies are evolving with that as well. And that's sort of how we try to look at things. There is understanding and making sure we bring a good match together, and try to do a lot of work on the front end. It can save a lot of headaches for everybody on the back end.
For sure. So we've talked a lot about the clinical aspect of this. We've talked a lot about bad things that can happen in the facilities and the implications associated with that. I would love to talk a little bit about some of the other stuff that goes on in the addiction treatment business and behavioral health, around whether it's HIPAA and confidentiality and cyber hacking issues, whether it's marketing, some of the issues that we've seen in the industry around deceptive marketing practices or patient brokering. Obviously, there's been a lot of attention paid to billing and fraud around that, and excessive billing and things like that. So I wonder, stepping away from the patient care aspect of things for a second, what, in some of those other areas that I just mentioned, what are the sort of liability exposure that those areas present? Is it very different in how you think about that versus thinking about, the patient care context?
It's different in the fact that, generally speaking, Greg, if you look at the other exposures that a behavioral health or addiction treatment facility has, is they don't, and I'll talk about a few of them here in a second, they don't have this high severity component that the professional liability and the clinical aspect of what a facility provides does. But if you think about it, and workers' compensation, and that can go hand in hand with, to a large extent, with the professional liability, is, if you have patients who are at high risk or have aggressive behaviors, suicidal behaviors, who can become aggressive or physical with staff, is your staff been adequately trained to try to de-escalate and deal with those situations? So, that's an example where, kind of the workers' compensation and professional liability, exposures overlap, if you will. You mentioned HIPAA and cyber liability. I mean, it's cyber liability and all of those things with that have become, I think, a huge issue, in every business, around the country, but in particular within healthcare, because you have the HIPAA and the protected health information component, and then you also have the financial information. So they have, a healthcare provider has both of those sets of information. And if you speak to the quote unquote experts in that space, it's not a question of if, it's only a question of when. So we spend a lot of time with our clients helping them understand. We have tools and resources that we can provide to them, helping them assess the risk on the front end, and then making sure that we're building an insurance policy and program that addresses their specific risk. One of the things that we've done for a number of our clients that's been very popular is what we call cyber tabletop exercise, where we bring in all the internal constituents, so that could IT, finance, HR, marketing, we really let the client dictate that, and role play with them. Okay, if this happens, how would you handle this if this happens? And what we try to do with them is not, okay, if they think they had a cyber breach or they know they had a breach or situation, what do we do? Do we call Joe? Do we call Risk Strategies? Who do we call? But we've already walked through that with them and come up with a game plan and a strategy so they know when something did happen or they think something might happen. We've already gone through that process with them and they know exactly what to do. Automobile is, I think, another big one that gets overlooked in the healthcare setting, and this is true for behavioral health. So, how are you credentialing? Most of our behavioral health clients have vans, 12, 15, 18 passenger vans where they might be taking little field trips or transporting people or going to pick people up, who fly into or coming into town to get care at their treatment facility. So, what kind of credentialing have you done with people who are driving your clients on the front end, and also for any company-owned vehicles? How are you maintaining those vehicles? Are you maintaining them consistently, or doing oil checks and checking the brakes and the quality of the vehicle, if you will, on a regular basis, and documenting that as well. Those are the sorts of things, and we're seeing insurance companies take, when you're providing transportation to patients, taking a much deeper dive on how clients are handling that from a risk management standpoint and what they're doing there.
So I've heard you talk about professional liability. I've heard you talk about workers' comp. I've heard you talk about cyber. I've heard you talk about just now auto. Is there anything else in the universe that we should be thinking about? I know, as you know, I'm not a healthcare provider. Prosperity doesn't provide patient care, but we're a small business, and I'm one of the founders. And so I know for myself, a very important component of our risk management is D&O insurance.
Correct.
That's another piece that fits in. How is that connected to all of this stuff?
Sure. So, what we call a lot of people refer to as a management liability insurance. So that would be the directors and officers liability, the employment practices liability, fiduciary liability, which covers you for liability for your 401k, and crime coverage. So employee theft, those sort of things. If, getting back to the coverages we spoke about, and then these coverages for the typical healthcare provider, we would consider that to be the core portfolio of coverages that we would recommend that they have. So the directors and officers liability covers the individual directors and officers, the business owners, this is a privately held organization, and the company itself from lawsuits or allegations around the company's business practices. We are starting to see, I can't say that I've necessarily seen this yet with our behavioral health clients, but it's hard for me to think that this is not coming. We're starting to see this more maybe on the hospital side and the senior living side is employment practices claims, especially around sort of the Me Too movement, and if you will, a whole new level of understanding and people now realizing, especially women, that these behaviors are not acceptable, and bringing suits and allegations against individuals for things that may have happened 3 years ago, 5 years ago, et cetera. And when we speak to our insurance company partners that we work with, they're starting to see, those sorts of things pick up. Discrimination is always a big one, if you will, and just given the nature of healthcare, right? It's such a close, intimate environment. Allegations around harassment, et cetera, are fairly prevalent in the space. But that's what we would consider to be the core suite of, again, going from professional and general liability to workers' compensation to cyber to auto, directors and officers, and employment practices liability, fiduciary, cyber, and crime, if you will.
So you'd say those are the must-haves from a insurance coverage perspective.
We think so, and you and I had that conversation before when you got the business off the ground. But absolutely, for a healthcare provider, you're really of any size, a startup, a small mom and pop treatment facility, those exposures are out there, and and for most of the smaller facilities, you couldn't really afford to absorb an uninsured claim of 50 or 75 or $100,000. That would be crippling to you and your business. So, to mitigate that risk and to transfer that risk to an insurance company just makes all the sense in the world.
So that raises sort of an interesting question in my mind. I mean, you've been around, the business for a while, and within behavioral health and healthcare more broadly, what is, I'd love to hear, some of your, not to be too sort of Schadenfreude, but like, I'd love to hear some of your horror stories. Is there any particular case that you can think of off the top of your head where somebody had some type of a bad event, they weren't adequately prepared for it? You mentioned, 50 or 75 or $100,000. Is that the kind of level of risk that you're looking at in the worst case scenario?
No, I mean, we're talking potential for millions of dollars in liability, depending on the nature of the claim. As people say, frequently healthcare is local, and it is local. So there are some states and jurisdictions that are more favorable than others. So there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, I've had clients who have had deaths, from elopements and things along those lines. I've had clients who have had deaths as a result of fires at their facilities.
Mm.
Those are, even in some of these situations where there was nothing our client did wrong per se. When it hits home for you. I have family members who have been in senior living facilities. I have family members who have been in behavioral health facilities. So it's very personal to me. It's how I make my living, and it's my profession. But I'm also, if you will, an indirect. I've been an indirect consumer, if you will. So when you see these, I'm not cold to it. It's not impersonal for me. And when we say to our clients, when you work with us, think of us as your outsourced risk management insurance team, and not, and we're on the same side of the tables with you. So when they have something that tragic that hits them, it hits us as well, and we feel it as well. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to think there's not anything that I haven't seen, but I'm sure that there is. And if I never saw one of those again, I'd be a very happy man.
Right. I can only imagine. But I'm sure you've also seen them on the other side of the coin too, where, maybe it's a result of some, risk management strategies that you help put in place, or maybe it's a result of prudent management on the part of the, the business independent of what you guys were doing. But I'm sure you've also seen situations where, some very bad outcomes were avoided by prudent risk management.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We feel we can make a difference in our clients' operations, and we do. Otherwise, I don't think we'd have the clients that we have and have maintained for a long period of time. We might not necessarily get wind of, if you will, near misses, but we've certainly been involved when the sorts of things and deaths that have occurred where we've worked closely with our client, the insurance company, to try to resolve those situations in the best way that we could, and provided them hopefully with good guidance and advice that allowed us to resolve those situations, given the tragedy and circumstances of the event, as well as could be done.
Right. So thinking about the sort of the whole scope of these, sort of risk issues and liability issues, we've talked a bit sort of towards the beginning about how you can manage, pre-incident, some of the risk on the patient care side. We've talked about, cyber and some of the other sort of hot button issues. in the business, on the business side of things, you know, on the administrative front.
Right.
Generally speaking, is there, and then obviously we've talked, you know, a fair bit about, you know, insurance coverage and how important a role that plays in managing your risk profile. Is there a rule of thumb, or is there, you know, some advice you can give based on your experience in terms of, you know, where should you be prioritizing if you're worried about you know, professional liability around patient care, you're worried about cyber risk, you're worried about, you know, you've got people out in the field and you don't know what they're telling prospective patients, and you're worried about deceptive marketing issues, and you might be worried that your billing company is, you know, not handling things the right way. But there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and most of the folks who run these addiction treatment centers aren't, you know, professional business people. They are clinicians. They are in it for the mission. They're not interested in risk management as their job. That's why they have you. So the question that I have for you is sort of, where should people be spending most of their time and energy and focus, you know, trying to protect themselves and mitigate some of these issues?
Sure. Well, you know, the heart of the business is clinical care, right? So it has to start with, in my mind, the professional liability coverage is making sure that from a policy standpoint, a clinical standpoint, that you know that you're running, you know, you're operating a first class facility, and working with partners who understand your business, both from an insurance broker standpoint, specialize in it, and from an insurance company standpoint, and that have tools and resources that can make your business better. I mean, that's one of the, you know, we talk, I think I feel as though the term adding value gets overused, and I think something you guys do, which we pride ourselves on, is creating value, right? You create value in what you do. And so we look at an insurance company's or a behavioral health or addiction treatment facilities insurance policies and say, how can we make that policy better? What can we do on the risk management side to make that organization a better risk? And if you do that, everybody wins. So it's having the experience, having the resources to walk into a situation, assess it, and find a way to create value for that organization that makes that organization a better risk, a better organization. And ultimately, if you do that, I think over time, you know, you'll also help them to drive their costs down.
Sure. You used the words better risk there a couple of times. What does that mean exactly? How do insurance companies evaluate that? Do they do site visits? Do they, you know, interview alumni? How does an insurance company evaluate what type of a risk you are?
Sure. I mean, and I think this is where we try to differentiate ourselves and how we do things and our experience, but also help the client differentiate themselves. Is, you're fighting for the insurance company's capital, right? You're asking them to make a capital commitment to you, and we firmly believe, even within a multi-site organization, that no two addiction treatment facilities are exactly alike. So how do we help our clients distinguish themselves to the insurance company and present them in the best possible way? And if you will, the insurance processes, they fill out an application, they provide copies of their policies and procedures, and it's, if you will, an electronic paper-based process. As I said, earlier in the interview here, is one of the things we really encourage our clients is to engage with their insurance company, and we recommend that they do. So if you are, and it's okay if you need help to ask for help, but if you're either already are running a first class operation or want to improve your operation, and even if you're running a first class operation, there's always room for sometimes even marginal improvements, is engaging with the insurance company. The best thing that can happen is when, the clinical risk management professional at the insurance company has come out, seen your facility or facilities, knows your executive team or some of your executive team, or the owner or ownership, and his senior facilities and comes back and says to the insurance company underwriter who's making, the pricing and financial decision there, we went out and saw, ABC Risk, and boy, they run a fantastic facility, and they're doing a fantastic job. It's a true partnership. They utilize our resources. They implement our recommendations when we have them, but all in all, the recommendations have been very minor. So when really what you're trying to do is you're fighting for their time and eyeballs, and a way to do that is to have the relationship we've been speaking about since the beginning, a real relationship. If it's just the exchange of of applications and policies and procedures via email or some other mechanism, I don't think that's the best recipe to get the best result.
Right. Well, and it's, I guess it raises the question for me. These insurance companies probably have thousands and thousands and thousands of risks that they're evaluating every day. Apart from having a pre-existing relationship, let's say that you're a new facility, for example, how do you kickstart that? How do you get the eyeballs that you were just talking about on your operation, so that you can demonstrate what type of outstanding care you provide and what type of tight policies and procedures you do have in place and what type of great staff you've got working for you?
Yeah, I mean that's part of that, and your question there is our job, and that's the value creation component that hopefully separates a bad broker from a good broker to a very good brokerage professional. But in that situation, it might be either if you're able to, a face-to-face meeting, or at least a conference call, again, with the executive team, getting their resumes and bios and sharing them with the insurance company to say, okay, and as and hopefully, this will change in some way, shape, or form sooner rather than later, is, the addiction treatment, there's a lower barrier to entry than there is for a hospital or a senior living facility, not as highly regulated. So that's one of the things the insurance, Joe Levy just didn't, apply for 5 beds in his home, and now has an addiction treatment facility that he just opened up, and he's been an insurance guy for 25 years, but they have an operational or clinical or combination with whoever the executive team or leadership team is going to be at the facility or facilities, and showing that. And maybe it's, a face-to-face meeting, or at a minimum scheduling a call so that the right people from the facility can talk about their background and history, and make the insurance company, if you will, comfortable that even though this is a quote unquote, new facility or startup operation, that these are very experienced operational clinical people, and they're going to run a first-rate facility.
Right. It's amazing to hear you talk about this, because for me, it really reminds me of something that we encounter all the time when it comes to negotiating contracts with health insurance companies on behalf of our clients. It's not just a business negotiation. It's really about what type of differentiated, unique clinical program have you got going on that the insurance company should want in their, in-network program. Sounds like it's very similar when it comes to, professional liability and, sort of the insurance on the other end of the spectrum, so to speak. Those guys are looking for, differentiators. Those guys are looking for reasons to like you, that aren't just you're paying them a premium every month.
Yeah, I mean, we hopefully are working with best-in-class providers, and we want to make sure the insurance company, when they're considering one of our clients, they understand that this is a best-in-class provider, and if we're providing insurance in this space, this is a client we want to be able to say is a client of ours.
Right. So, I think based on that last conversation, I can maybe guess what one answer to this question might be. But, one thing I'm curious about is if you could leave people with one piece of advice, one takeaway that they can go and implement in their organization tomorrow, apart from call Joe, what would that be?
Oh, you just took my answer there, Greg. Higher risk strategies first and foremost. And I don't know it would be one thing to implement, but to, I think many people still think of insurance as a commodity, and this is maybe a self-serving comment since it's my livelihood and profession, but if you think of it again as, it protects the assets of the organization, that it's not a commodity, but it's a valuable tool, and there's an opportunity if I'm working with the right insurance company, right insurance broker, that they can help me make my business get better. That sort of, if you will, that piece of advice or mindset is don't look at insurance as a commodity. We understand there's a price sensitivity to an insurance product, and that's not lost on us. And our goal and objective is to provide our clients with the most cost-effective insurance we can. But the most important thing from my perspective is to make sure that you have the right insurance and the right protections in place, and cheaper is not always better.
Couldn't have said it better. That's, I always say that I'm not interested in price, I'm interested in value.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what you're pointing out here, is that, the partnership and the type of coverage that you get and the people that you're working with, really can differentiate and can make a big difference to the ultimate, outcome for your business. And in the case that you do ultimately have a bad outcome.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So before we sign off, is there anything else that you want to, make sure that we bring up, make sure that our viewers take away from this conversation?
Yes, I would say that if you're not working with prosperity, behavior, health, and risk strategies, you're missing out on a huge opportunity. So give Greg a call, give me a call, and let us do what we do, and we'll find opportunities to create value for your organization and make it better.
Terrific. Well, I really appreciate it, Joe. Thank you so much for coming to talk with me. Thanks for the endorsement, as always. We love Joe. We love Risk Strategies. They handle our risk management at Prosperity, and we couldn't think more highly of them. So we really appreciate Joe's time, and we will post contact info for you to get in touch with us along with this video. Thank you for your time, for watching this, for sticking with us. We hope that we've been able to create some value for you. And as always, please reach out with any questions or follow-ups. Thanks again.
Thanks, Greg.